Welcome to this Divergent Thinking webinar. It's part 3 of a part 4 series. For those of you who attended the first session, well, welcome back. For those of you that joined the second session, welcome back. And for those of you that are brand new, welcome. My name is Stuart Hughes. I am President-elect for IOSH, and I'm delighted to be involved with this series and to be your host for this session. Fear not, Lawrence Webb, our president, will be back for the final session, and I'll give you a bit more details on that when we come to a close. The first 2 series, we've gone back to the foundations. We've really drilled down into what neurodiversity is, the language we use, and some of the importance of understanding the misconceptions and maybe preconceptions surrounding that. The second part saw us kind of talking about empowering our future leaders to spearhead change. The session explored the skills and kind of flexible solutions that we all need to understand to get the best from our own careers and how to support those that we work with. They were both fantastic. If you've missed any of the sessions, one of our technical wizards in the background will pop links into the chat function, so you'll be able to access those. And I would just ask that as we go through today's session, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section and not the chat section, because otherwise we might miss them. That was the first 2 sessions. Let's kind of focus on what we're doing today. And today's all about individual support, adopting new ways of working and bringing the best out of people. Today's really a case study. It's really a story and real life example from our 2 guests today who have been working together to do just that, and to look at how the actions that they've taken have made a positive difference for both of them and their organisation. It's also a topic that's dear to my heart. So I have dyslexia. I found out about it when I was 19, and have various different support mechanisms in place to make my life a little bit easier, but also probably those people that work around me, so that they've got a bit of an understanding about some of the chaos that I can periodically cause. Less about me, more about our guests. So I'm really super pleased to welcome both Gary and Sharon. Sharon Booth's employed as the head of human resources for Worcestershire County Council. She's worked for them for over 19 years in various operational and strategic HR posts. And Gary is employed with Worcestershire County Council as the head of occupational health and safety. He's been a health and safety practitioner for over 24 years. Some of our future leaders on the call might not have been around 24 years ago when you started, Gary, but there we are. We all get that now nowadays. I'm not going to go in too much into the back history of this. This really is Gary and Sharon's story. So I'm going to just kick it off and kind of come over to both of you and say, look, can you just kind of give us, to start things off, an understanding of your journey together, what's happened and kind of what brings you to talk to us today?
You want me to go first, Sharon?
Yes, you start, Gary.
Yeah. So I think it's good, before we start mentioning about me starting the employment of within Worcestershire County Council, it might be useful to get a background of on me conditions. So I've got dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism and ADHD. And I think my story might be replicable of people of my age. Like, I'm 52 now, who are neurodiverse, because I never got diagnosed with having conditions until later in life. Like, I was 37 when I got diagnosed as being dyslexic and dyspraxia, and I was 47 when I got diagnosed with having autism and ADHD. However, despite that, I think it now resonates now that I know that I had the conditions, because throughout school, I had a lot of things that are obvious that are conditions on the neurodivergence scale. So I was extremely quiet, wasn't being able to concentrate, very poor academically. I remember throughout primary school, I was always about 2 years behind in reading and writing. Extremely anxious about everything, very poor communication skills, and I was totally focused on one thing, which was football at that time. Football. I remember being in the classroom just wanting to be outside playing football. and constantly being told that it was strange, and that led to being bullied a lot. Difficulty in processing information, and so that replicated throughout when I started working when I was 16. Work experience, I'd done time in the armed forces, and all of them shared one thing. It was the focus on what I never done or what was not going right, and that is the opposite now. What's happening in the council, but I'll mention that later on. Sharon?
No, as Gary's just said, before Gary joined WCC, I was aware of some of his conditions through the recruitment process. So obviously he divulged those to me. So the very start of our journey, I had those, and we needed to ensure that, you know, when Gary joined Worcestershire County Council, that we had the right things in place to enable him to start his job and his role here. But I think actually the journey we've been on, Gary, is a lot more than that, because there's technical things we need to get in place, whether that's speech recognition on Gary's laptop, looking at the environments he works in. But it's really understanding that lived experience that Gary's just said there, and his experience from not having a diagnosis till later in life, and the experience he's had in other workplaces, and as part of that, to ensure really that I can see what his expectations are here, and ensure that we go much further and wider than just what he needs in place in terms of equipment and adjustments, but actually, how do we work together then? How do we communicate? How do we provide a safe environment where Gary feels completely at ease to tell me everything I need to know to ensure that as his manager and, you know, a leader here at the council, I can ensure there's an environment to bring the best out in Gary. And I think that's gone really well, Gary. Well, from my point, it has. And I think that relationship's developed as we move on. And yeah, it's been quite a successful one.
And Gary, just, I sit here and I think I've got a lot of admiration for somebody who's prepared to come and talk to the profession about their journey, about some of the challenges that it faced, and in particular this kind of late diagnosis. Why is it important for you to have this conversation today?
I think it's really important because I'm going to be talking quite a lot about what's been good about the having the condition, especially in this employer, and we'll talk about it later on a lot more. But these are exemplary, and I have never felt more confident and competent, not just as a manager, not just as a health and safety practitioner, but as an individual, because of the conditions there, and how fantastic Sharon is, and also the whole organisation. So I was very reluctant to share things with Sharon before the interview, because I've had a couple of really bad experiences. So I'm going to go through these, but first, before I do, I want to mention two things. There's two sides to every story, obviously, and I'm only giving you mine. And secondly, I'm not going to mention names or organisations, because that's unfair. So in 2013, at that time, I've just been diagnosed. I only got diagnosed as being dyslexic and dyspraxic. I got made redundant in my job in the public sector in England. So I started looking jobs throughout the country for health and safety jobs. So I eventually got an interview, and it's successful for the health and safety manager's position with a large organisation in Guernsey. So we was negotiating about start dates and all stuff like that, and then about reasonable adjustments. So all I asked them to do was there was one or two things, but the biggest thing, which was proofreading reports that went to the board only. Now that was very infrequent, about once a month, and it was just like, let's say, a spell checking, that type of things. So eventually, when we was going through the negotiations, I got told that they would withdraw me off of employment because they did not think these reasonable adjustments was not feasible to be put in place. So interestingly, I'd done the research around the law and equality in Guernsey, and they were in quite an unusual situation, as they legally was not part of the UK and not part of the European Union, hence where they had very weak disability and equality legislation. So when I told people about what had happened, they were quite shocked and angry and about not putting reasonable adjustments in place. In fact, so much so, it led to a really good comedy moment for me. Because what a lot of people were saying, well, why don't you write to the chief executive? And I was thinking, I'm dyslexic, it's hard to write. And then also another, what I thought and said to them, that's like, analogy is like someone is in a wheelchair use, be discriminated for wheelchair use, and then you say to them, don't stand for that. Yeah. So that's that. And I eventually got another job, and everything was okay. But so this, I got invited for an interview. This was way after this, and by this time I've been diagnosed as being autistic and having ADHD as well, for a very large public sector in England. So prior to the interview, I told them that there was a few reasonable adjustments needed for the interview, which was writing. Like I had autism, extra time to write down the answers to the questions, and also a pen and paper. So when I got the job, my line manager started to discuss reasonable adjustments in post, but also what happened at interview. And then he said he thought I was strange, and he imagined the person to come through the door had a pencil up the nose. And then, so I also told, I was in charge of a team, so I told not only my line manager, I told the team from the start, and they were okay at the start. But after a period of time, and there's a lot more to this than I can disclose here, and I haven't got enough time, there's a lot of team dynamics going on. But what my team was saying to me, to my line manager about me, was they felt uncomfortable because I was overly anxious all the time, and I was a poor communicator. Obviously, those are the characteristics of being autistic. So I literally had this thing going through my mind, literally right up to the call before the interview with Worcestershire County Council. Now, on the interview was Sharon, and who's head of HR, and the associate director of HR. And at the time, we were in a pandemic, so it was virtual. So literally from the very first, within a minute, I felt so pleased and overwhelmed with the informalness and the friendliness of both Sharon and Richard. I disclosed everything, and I was literally, I thought, do I disclose it to them or discuss it? And I'm really pleased I did, because it's gone absolutely fantastic since then.
And Sharon, just picking up from that, and where kind of where Gary's left us at this point, like coming into that process and then being made aware of that, how did you deal with it? How did you approach it? And what are the things that you think that make your organisation different to some of the experiences that Gary's had in the past?
I think it was really important that, as Gary was opening up, that we had information at hand. Really, it felt quite a natural conversation. I've got to say, it just felt natural. I'd hope, and I'm speaking from our point, and whether Gary felt this, I think right at that start of that interview process, we made it very clear the supportive organisation we are, the things that we've got in place, and the importance of having all information to hand to make this. So an employment relationship's a two-way thing. It's not only got to work for us as the employer, but it's got to work for Gary as well. And actually this was a key role, and we were at the time of a pandemic, as Gary said. So actually, I think we were more tuned in to that interaction because we had to be. It wasn't a face-to-face interaction, and it was on Zoom, and I think actually at that time we were all much more. Certainly at Worcestershire County Council, due to COVID, we've been much more aware of the needs to support people's well-being, to create environments, to communicate with each other, to provide safety and trust in an environment for those conversations to take place. And as Gary said, I think it's just gone from strength to strength. Prior to Gary being interviewed, we'd actually just introduced here at the council what we call a workplace adjustment passport. And it goes much further than just, as Gary said, equality and disability legislation. As an employer, we have to consider reasonable adjustments for anybody that's defined as having a disability under the Equalities Act. But we go much more beyond that. Actually, I think we have a duty as an employer to have a document where any adjustments that somebody might need for any reason, anything that's going on in their life or, health, whether it's a disability, not a disability, we've got a document that can just open up a conversation. You tell us what challenges, what barriers, what things that you need. And actually, as an employer, we sit and listen to that and see what we can put into place and into practice. The Workplace Adjustment Passport is a document that's owned by the employee. It's a live document, so not only does it record any adjustments that have been agreed, but it's that sounding point really for regular conversations. Does it need reviewing? Does it need updating? Having it on a document, which sounds quite formal, but means that actually the employee can take that with them, whether they change roles, they don't have to, a manager doesn't have to make them go through disclosing all that information again. It's there. And I think it puts an onus also on the employee, because we can only make adjustments or create an environment if we're given all the information. So I think the most important takeaway is creating an environment that's safe and that Gary or any other employee feels that they can disclose things, not fear judgment on those, that we park any unconscious bias that I think everybody has to the side, and we truly listen to what somebody's wants and needs are. That's kind of how we approached it, and what we've got in place here, and it's certainly been a success for Gary and I.
Fantastic. And Gary, I'm just going to take you back to the point where you left us off there. You kind of just you gave us this insight that you felt some warmth and some comfort within the immediacy of the start of the interview, and felt empowered to share all of this stuff. But how did it feel once you'd kind of given that information across and started that conversation? You've done that disclosure. How was it? A relief, or were you feeling like insecure or anxious? Well, can you just talk us through that process, and then I suppose how you felt at the end of it?
Yeah. So I think it was a mixture of everything you said. I was extremely anxious because of me previous bad conditions, and I should have said also I've had a lot of good experiences as well, and it's not just the bad, but obviously whilst being human beings, we remember more about the bad stuff. So but I've got to be honest, right from the start, when we went through this reasonable adjustment passport, both Sharon and myself agreed that this should be reviewed on a regular basis. And I would say, Sharon, it's every 3-6 months we look at this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think the biggest thing that, me and Sharon discussed this quite a lot, why I enjoy working there. And it's down to two things. It's down to mainly Sharon being a good manager, but mainly being a good human being. Now, I think the thing that sticks out most for me about Sharon and the council, it's not just Sharon herself, it's the council. It's that focus, it's that positive reinforcement. Now, I've never, ever been in an organisation where people just focus on what goes right. Now I've told you a bit about when I was young, all people looked around is when things go wrong. And it's amazing that the more, it's that inattentional blindness. If anyone knows psychology, that inattentional blindness means you only look for what you think about. So all my life, also because I've had that negative interactions, also look for is when things go wrong. Now I've been in Sharon's company so long, and Sharon's a qualified coach as well, which helps a lot, helps me a lot. So now when I look in work, I'll give you a really good example in a second. All we discuss is about when things go right. Now that means Sharon don't discuss the challenges. In fact, we do discuss the challenges, but it's how we have them conversations. Now Sharon almost probably laugh in a minute. He'll be laughing when I say this. I've went up, because I'm extremely honest, I went up to Sharon and said, listen, Sharon, I think I've mucked up. I've done X, Y, Z. Sharon says, why do you think you've mucked up? And I say this. Then Sharon will say, well, isn't there any other positive things about that? And I think, well, yeah, this, and this. And then she finally gives her opinion. Finally she says, well, there's another way of looking at it. And I say, yeah, it's not too bad. And then Sharon says, well, if it's not, my opinion's not important, which it is, by the way, Sharon. But, and then what she says, then what she says is, in my opinion is, it's great that you're open and honest, but let's look at it another way. And I've never, ever, ever been in an organization where you felt that comfortable being open and honest. And don't forget, people think being honest is only about when things go wrong. Being honest is really, really important to me. And the majority of the time I talk about things is when things go right. Wouldn't it be great as health and safety professionals is rather than looking about that minute accident that occurred, well, let's look at the, that 1 in 10,000, a small accident occurs. Let's start looking about when things go right.
Yeah, and I think there's a lovely reframing, isn't it? Not just for the, for the profession as a whole, but just in terms of that kind of human performance and human management aspects. And look, the rapport that you two have is lovely, and it's really, it like comes through. It's really, really nice to see. Sharon, obviously you're working with Gary, you're managing him, you're helping bring out the best of him. But what do you think, like, we can do, the collective we, the royal we, if you like, as leaders, to encourage, that engagement with our employees who may be neurodiverse?
I think the most important thing is create an environment of trust and safety, really, so that you can have those honest conversations. Because actually, as Gary's just said, it's in those conversations, whether things go wrong, go right, that we're armed with all the information we need to move things forward. So the most important thing for me is creating that environment. I think as leaders, there's an obligation on us, isn't there, to sort everything out, solution mode, know everything about everything. And actually, I think we need to park that. And I might know textbook theories around neurodiversity, some of the conditions, but actually I don't know how that impacts Gary, and I haven't got a lived experience of those. And I also need to park anything that preconceived ideas or unconscious bias. And I think that gives me as a leader the confidence as well and the safety to go in and think, actually, I just need to listen here. And then once I've got all this information, Gary, how best can we communicate? When I do this, does that work for you? Are you getting what you need out of me? And actually, I think that's what we need to do more, really. It's just creating that environment where those conversations can take place and not be scared, because actually sometimes as leaders we don't talk about something because it's, are we going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to mention something that triggers something with Gary and I've not used the right word? Or so it's having the confidence to just actually go into that conversation and just let it flow, really. I think that's what we need to do more.
And like, this is $1 million question, and it's not one that we've pre-prepared or discussed. So sorry, but it's just come to me, and let's see how we get on with it. But how have you found the space, the time, or allowed yourself the capacity to do those things that you've just mentioned? Like, because it's not easy. We're all under crushing pressure. There's there's a million and different things to do, but you've found a mechanism, obviously, that's working for you and within your organization. But I imagine that you've done a bit of trial and error to get there. So how have you kind of just allowed yourself that space to create that safe space for the conversations?
I think for myself, I think it was just very easy, and it's just like Sharon described right from the start. We discussed the reasonable adjustment passport, what goes well. Sharon listens a lot, but I've got to be also clear. This is not just about neurodiversity. Most probably a lot of people on this call are safety practitioners, and you might disagree with what I'm about to say, but well, us safety practitioners talk about having conversations about health and safety culture. I don't think we should be having them conversations, because if you start having questions separately about health and safety culture, diversity culture, financial culture, openness. What I'm getting at, we should be having a culture of being open and doing the right things for the right reason. When you start to have them things, whether you're a manager or an employee, a senior manager, a board member, of doing something separately, cognitively different, you want everyone to be doing the right things, whether it be reporting on accidents, whether it be not discrimination, not being racist. We should be having these questions, these conversations about being open and honest. So we, like I say, some people might disagree with that, and that's okay. It's just my personal opinion. But I think that's what I find within the county council. We're not perfect, far from it, but I find that culture of doing the right thing for the right reason resonates throughout the organisation. And you know, Sharon might mention what we're doing about well-being. Really, you know, we are absolutely smashing well-being. Are we perfect? Far from it. So it's about having them open conversations for me, Sharon.
Yeah, and you're right. I think when we've all got busy jobs, it is making time for those conversations. I think the investment right at the start. So the moment Gary, you know, joined us, we did take time at the beginning to make sure that all the information was in place, the right things were in place to make sure that, you know, from equipment to space in the office, and actually, if the office is really busy, does that impact on Gary's ability to concentrate, or does he find that overwhelming? So investing the time at the beginning and having really open conversations. And then actually it just becomes part and parcel of our weekly catch-ups, whether we're talking about, you know, work or objective setting, something's going on with Gary's team. We just spend a little bit of time at each of the start of those there, making sure that anything that needs tweaking or adjusting is done so. So I think, because we are all busy, and new things crop up all the time, it's that investing right at the start and creating that environment. And as Gary said, we have focused a lot on our sort of well-being, holistic well-being, because there's something around, you know, performance in a job role. But actually, if we take the time to ensure that people are supported socially, physically, you know, their financial health and well-being, everything that creates a human being, we all bring that stuff into work. So we've all got a job to do, but actually if we can provide an environment that supports all of those areas and aspects, I think it goes a long way. It almost becomes part and parcel, and you're not, doesn't feel like you're spending a huge amount of time on it. If that makes sense. Probably haven't articulated that really well.
No, I really like that.
Smooth conversation.
You've basically said, look, there's a bit of time up front to invest into this, and then you normalize it in the day to day.
Yeah.
Harry, I can see you've got something to add.
So just I think it was a good. I've just been thinking about this. Good, perfect timing for this. What Sharon was saying about putting that time in at the start. So I think a lot of organisations and it's fantastic to see, are putting the emphasis on the recruitment of neurodiversity employees, which is absolutely fantastic. However, they don't increase the knowledge of existing staff and managers around neurodiversity. That then be the massive problem, because they're trying to get these neurodivergent people in, knowing that we do things differently and we bring a lot more different things. However, that doesn't make the facilitating conditions any better, because of this neurodivergent joins a team or a manager that doesn't do anything deliberately to make things difficult, but they haven't got the knowledge. So it's increasing the knowledge. So it's increasing the knowledge. It's just not about training people. The most important thing that any person can do, if you're working with anyone neurodiversity, is asking questions about how that condition affects them. Because a lot of my family are autistic, have got ADHD, and we're all different. So my thing is noise. So noise really overwhelms me, especially in meetings. But I can't explain this, but my two biggest hobbies are going to football matches, which is extremely noisy, and going to concerts, which is very noisy. And it's very difficult for people to get that. And another example about something personal is my partner. She's absolutely fantastic. However, when I mention the word anxiety, she says something along the lines of, "But Gary, I get anxious." What I say to her is, I get cold. She has got what's the condition where you get Raynaud's disease. So she's got Raynaud's disease and she gets cold all the time. I get cold a lot. However, just because I get cold doesn't mean that I've got Raynaud's and I understand what Raynaud's is. And I think there's a lot of stigma and confusion around neurodiversity in society, and especially in this. And I think that's down to people don't understand the importance of making reasonable adjustments for neurodiversity. So an example would be, they understand physical things. So an example would be, if you was having someone new come in, who's a wheelchair user, majority of people will understand that they need to be able to access the building, having suitable welfare toilet facilities, conducting a PEEP, and all that good stuff for physical disabilities. However, being on the neurodiversity scale just means that your brain functions differently. People can't see inside the brain. So what I find that people don't understand, and they're either not asking the right questions or guessing what they might need. To me, they're equally as bad as each other.
And I'm just going to kind of carry on with that train of thought, if I may, which is obviously you've sounds very much to me like you've had, you know, the good and the bad from experiences, and you're in, you know, obviously a position where you're thriving now, and you've got the support of an employer and you know, the people that evidently are helping you along with that, and it's been a two-way process. But for those, you know, that are maybe nervous about sharing their conditions with their employer, or nervous about declaring an interview, like what would you say to those people? Do you think it's important that they do declare, or where do you sit on that position?
So I'll start. You absolutely hit something really, really important there, because people may not be comfortable sharing their information, and but I think it really is important to at least share the bare minimum, so that the employer is equipped to know, actually, what have I got to put in place? Because I think if you share a little bit, and I make sure you've got the right equipment, the right environment, and I can make your first week here, you've got the equipment you need, and you're not struggling with that, then maybe somebody feels a little bit more confident to think, well, actually, that's gone well for me, that's gone right. Maybe I can divulge a little bit more. So we're talking about, oh, actually, you started having your team meetings, and I'll use Gary's example, actually, things can be quite noisy. Then maybe he'd feel a little bit more confident in sharing that information. I think as employers, we need to make it really clear how we protect that information, and that somebody needs to be comfortable. We also need to set up expectations that we can only react or do something with the right information in front of us. Otherwise, we may have to make assumptions or do something that might not be. And you know, it's really hard, because a lot of this is around a culture and an organisation, and we know that a culture is the biggest thing that's intangible and so hard to create. So I think, and I'm going to go back and just use our example of a workplace adjustment passport. It's using little things like that can maybe get a bit of information at the start, and then, you know, that little nudge theory really, and create an environment where somebody feels more comfortable, has had a positive experience, to share more and more. But it is down to the individual, isn't it, really? But it's letting them know if we can only do things with the information to hand, really. And we've come on a long journey here at Worcestershire County Council, so, you know, we don't get everything right. I think we've made headways over the last 18 months. I do think COVID had a lot to do with that, with us thinking differently and about all of the aspects. You know, you take away overnight somebody's ability to have social interaction, to go out and take the things away that we all take for granted, but actually makes a person and impacts on their performance, whether that's at work, outside of that. So I think, you know, nobody would want to go back to those days of the pandemic, but I think it taught us a lot, actually, and we've held on to all of those things that went well during our response to the pandemic, and created documents such as our workplace adjustment passport, and I think it's really helped here. Yeah.
Excellent. And look, that's really timely. So I'm just gonna, I can see we've generated lots of interest, so I want to get to the people online's questions. So I'm just going to kind of close out our little chat with this question, and then we'll dive into audience questions, and then we may circle back around depending on how many we get through. Just a bit of reflection, I suppose. So we've heard the story, we've heard the journey, we've heard the acknowledgement that perhaps we don't always get things right, and we've, you know, perhaps over the last 18 months done better. Just reflecting back, is there anything that either of you would have done differently, or any things that you would do now that you know about that you didn't know kind of when you started this process?
I think from my perspective, I wouldn't have done anything different apart from a negotiation of £100,000 a year more salary. But I don't think that's going to happen, Sharon. No, being serious now, being serious. Honestly, to answer the question, I wouldn't have done anything differently, because the most important thing for me, I was feeling anxious right from the very start. You know, I mentioned Sharon, how good she is as an individual and a manager, which it is, but it's an organisation-wide thing. Our team, health and safety team, are fantastic. Our wider HR team are fantastic, and the whole organisation is there about that support. And you know, we were talking about culture. When I'm in meetings, I think I've got a very healthy habit. I've been told that I always use the phrase, "How can I support you?" which is a good trait to have. I get that asked at least once a week by other departments in there. So we were just talking about culture. This is not just about Sharon being a good egg. It's not just about HR being good. It's about the organisation having them shared values and beliefs. And I think that's really important, because, you know, majority of us health and safety practitioners, we do the job because we genuinely care about people. And I think that's the very same within our council.
Grand. Anything to add, Sharon?
No, I wouldn't change anything about the where we've come from, really. And I think as we're being used here today as a case study, which is really great. It's really great to have that conversation. I think the time of joining for Gary, and we spoke about this earlier, didn't we, Gary? Was probably a bit of a case study for where we come as an authority and the workplace adjustment passport. And I think the journey Gary and I have been on, he joined just at the time that we got these things in place and implemented. And I just think it's a pretty successful example of how, you know, we can always improve on everything, but a pretty good case study or example of how it can go really well. And having, you know, Gary does such a fantastic job, and it's got a fantastic skill set, and it's just brilliant that we can have him in the organisation and provide that sort of two-way working relationship that delivers great health and safety here in the council. So I'm really, I wouldn't change it.
It's interesting there. I forgot to mention this. Yeah, we've just mentioned about joined in the pandemic, and the person that took over had been with the council for 17 years. He's a doctor. He's a doctor, I think, of chemistry, I think. Really nice fella. And, you know, some of the systems he's got in place are absolutely fantastic. But it was through, you know, I don't think I've told Sharon this, and it was through them conversations of Sharon believing in me, Sharon focusing on what's going right. I just got to the stage where I felt that confidence. I was thinking, Clive was excellent, and he is excellent, and he's a decent fella. But, you know, I'm not Clive. You know, some things I can do are better than Clive and vice versa, but we're different. So rather than going into that imposter syndrome, you know, I was lucky that I've got a fantastic team, fantastic manager and an organisation that I could put my own stamp on it, recognising that what was good in the past, but, you know, things can improve.
Yeah, it's not just me saying this. They're just going through the Q&A bit here. There's a lot of love for this session, which is fabulous, and do want to get to some of the questions. So Greg Foster's asked, how much detail do you think is appropriate to share for those who work with colleagues who've got a neurodivergent condition, perhaps in a larger organization? So they may have, you know, 100 or 1,000 plus employees. Like how much do you think is appropriate to share? I
think that's a very easy answer from my perspective. It's however, it's whatever that person who has the condition wants to share.
Yeah.
So we'll give it. I've always been quite vocal, apart from my initial first few months because of what happened. But now I tell a lot of people And it's up to that individual. Now, we're all different, so some people might feel comfortable sharing that they're autistic, some people might not. You know, an example of some people might have cancer, and quite rightly, they mightn't want to share it, other people might. So to answer your question, Stuart, I'd say it's down to the individual who has the conditions. They're the best person.
And I'd agree with that. I do think there's a minimum that people should be able to share. So that's the things that we need to, as an organisation, as employers, we have a duty to ensure are in place. So that's any adjustments, particularly around disability, that we need to enable somebody to do their work. But then I'd agree with Gary, it's whatever else that they're comfortable, and it's creating an environment or processes that enable somebody to share as much or as little that they need. But I think it's really important from an employer's side to make sure that people do share what we do to make somebody be able to do their job, to be safe in their job, that we've got the right equipment and tools in place. So yeah, and also check in with the individual that how widely do they want that shared, you know? So we have an obligation. Gary may not want, and he knows that if he doesn't want his condition shared, nobody's going to hear from me. I'll just make sure that we put everything in place. But actually, Gary feels comfortable to share it to the wider environment. So yeah. So what we haven't mentioned, Stuart, is about sharing information. We haven't mentioned the fact that we've got a legal duty to keep confidential information. Yeah. So I'll tell you how confident I am, but not just with Sharon, with the organisation. Every 2 weeks we go to a HR senior managers meeting, and it was only beforehand Sharon said to me, "Do you mind disclosing that we are doing this webinar?" And I thought, well, the whole world knows through internet, but that's just an example of the respect that Sharon has got for me and protecting my condition.
Yeah, that's superb. And we've got, like I said, quite a few questions in now. I'll do my best to rattle through them, and ones we don't get to, I'm sure we'll try and provide some answers offline. My friend, and sounds like your friend Gary, Darren Sutton, said he's had the privilege of working with you quite closely over the last few years, and really appreciated kind of your courage and foresight in flagging potential challenges, early in the working relationship. And he's asking, what can we do to kind of get over this shroud where people feel uncomfortable about disclosing, and how do we encourage people to become more open?
So do you want me to answer that? Well, what I'd say is I'm very honoured to that Darren has just said that. Just give you an example, a really practical example before I answer the question. I've been working with Darren now for about 2 years. Absolutely fantastic fella, and he's a genuine god of this industry, a rock star. What I like most about Darren is his ability to be human. Now, I've been on a trainer course for behavioural science, and I've seen him online. And then I went up to, you'll have to excuse me, this is a joke. I'm a massive Everton fan. And obviously Everton's biggest rivals are Liverpool. They plan at Liverpool, at Anfield. So I actually went to Anfield, which I felt really uncomfortable, just to speak to Darren. And, a really good example about doing things differently is I went there to meet Darren in person, which was fantastic, and to meet someone else, one of the other speakers. I went out my comfort zone because I approached Darren and I approached someone else. But to get over the shroud, it's just about being open and honest. And like I say, it's having that dual thing of the employee being confident, sharing it, and then things are going to be getting done. Now, relating back to health and safety, we all say to people that they should be reporting accidents, but if they get criticised for it or nothing gets done, that's not going to increase their reporting of accidents. So just think about what makes a good health and safety culture, or, all the stuff that we as health and safety practitioners know about culture, and just think about that, or about everything, about doing the right things for the right reason.
And I've got a question for Sharon now, which was probably one I would have asked as well, because I think these workplace adjustment passports sound super interesting and obviously very helpful. But what are the information governance controls around the content of those?
Right, well, that is a good question.
It's a big question, isn't it?
It is. So we can't force anybody to complete a workplace adjustment passport. It has certain questions on there that encourages somebody to give us information that they need to give us. So I've already said that actually under, you know, the Equality Act and the duty that places on us as an employer, there is certain information that we, you know, would keep on there to ensure that we put in required reasonable adjustments. But I think the important thing is the individual owns it. So that's not a document that's shared around. We don't put it on a database. The individual owns that document, and they are comfortable with what's shared on that document. A copy may be kept within HR, within advisory team, and that might be for anything that we need to link in, I don't know, with occupational health, or there's something, but that is kept completely confidential. Outside of that, nobody has access to that document. So it's the individual's document, because you're absolutely right. And there has to be that understanding about where that information's kept or not kept. So they know that right from the start. Yeah.
Just want to expand on that. I know the question is about information governance, but one thing I'd like to say is what we do is we don't share this document. It's only with people who know. Now, I know I get involved with a lot of these reasonable adjustment passports, but that's as a health and safety practitioner. Like, you know, some people have got cancer. I'm returning to work during COVID. Some people have got brain tumours and they're working. So the release of that information, firstly, is only with the permission of the person, and secondly, only on a need-to-know basis. Right, I'm just thinking aloud, Stuart, and you know, I'm not volunteering Sharon for anything. I'll do this, Sharon. Should we do an article? We do an article and put it in the SHP. That's our magazine, Sharon.
Yeah.
About reasonable adjustments.
Hey, well, there's IOSH wizards in the background who will capture that offer, and we'll work out how to do an article for the relevant publications. That's grand. Louise Griffin has asked. Essentially, she's learned a lot more about neurodiversity from the first 3 webinars that we've done so far. Would like to support, you know, the groups that she works with more, but, you know, how best do you approach understanding if people have, you know, maybe not disclosed to the employer but have got conditions that they need support with? Like, is it, you know, we've spoken about asking questions, is it a good idea to kind of openly approach the group directly and ask these things, or is there a better approach to identifying how we can support people?
It's a very difficult question to ask, because you know, this needs to be about the relationship with the person. So I know, you know, years ago, I was investigating a lot of accidents that was with a particular member of staff. This was going back about 15 years when I'd just been diagnosed as being dyslexic. And even though she'd had training, I thought she didn't understand the training, because a lot of it was documented. So what I raised it with her is she dyslexic in a very, very sensitive way, by the way, just me and her. And she got quite offended by that. Now, that may be because, you know, I didn't have that relationship, but I would just ask them questions, like just about being open and honest and being sensitive.
Thank you.
Oh.
No, carry on, Sharon.
No, I was going to say, one of the things we do here is sometimes people don't, you know, want to say that they've got conditions, or Gary mentioned earlier about some of the stuff we're doing around wellbeing, and we do a weekly sort of bulletin out, Wellbeing Wednesday, where we'll signpost or we'll highlight, you know, it's Men's Health Week, or, you know, we're doing stuff, I think, on menopause support. So we might do a lot of signposting or raising issues that creates an understanding in the wider organisation that these, oh God, these are things, actually, it might not just be me that's struggling, and the organisation's flagging up, signposting. We regularly go out around our workplace adjustment passport. Please remember, this is in place. You can start one of these, conversations can be had. So I think you can also, alongside what Gary has said, create that environment where it feels comfortable for people to raise things, or it's a conversation that doesn't offend somebody. Actually, I've noticed on the last few team meetings, you seem to be struggling. Is there anything we need to discuss? So you don't you know, you don't need to call somebody out and say, I think you've got this and you need to tell me something, but it's just creating that space where actually it's okay for us to say, I've noticed, or is there anything you want to share? Yeah, and that might be a way to approach it.
Great. Look, there's a couple of really nice comments here in terms of inspiration and the fact that, you know, some of our members have got children who have, you know, conditions, and this story is kind of giving them some hope for their employment future. So I just wanted to give you that feedback because that's lovely. There is a question from a gentleman called Lawrence Webb. He's our president. He's had the day off from hosting this, but has still attended, and he's just said thank you very much for adding so much value to it. He says, like me, you'll both believe that this subject area should naturally be an essential part of any employer's wellbeing strategy. How do we go about this?
Oh,
We can, you can say to Lawrence, we don't want to answer his question on at the moment, or it's too big a question for the time we've got, or you can take a go.
It's most probably too big, but very, you know, Sharon's been involved a lot in our wellbeing strategy. But I'd say it's about, you know, we've got loads of pillars in our wellbeing strategy: freedom within boundaries, doing the right things, them type of things. It's just reinforcing that value-based working. You know, we talk about value-based safety rather than compliance safety, which is best at compliance-based safety, where people do the things to achieve the bare minimum, or people do the values, people do that value thing for safety, which has got a genuine desire to improve things.
I think another important part of wellbeing is that inclusivity as well. So I think, you know, neurodiversity is something that's more spoken about now, actually. It was probably something like Gary said, it's a generational thing, isn't it? I mean, my daughter's recently been diagnosed with dyslexia. Actually, I've spoken to Gary about it quite a bit. She's about to start high school. So there is more understanding now, but actually the workplace, we have lots of people with Gary's story, really, that, you know, late diagnosis, not understood. But I think as part of any wellbeing strategy, it's the things that I've said, sort of our Wellbeing Wednesday, highlighting it, giving information, signposting. It's just that awareness of things, and above all else, it's having that alongside a diversity and inclusivity strategy as well, to make sure that everybody can be included, have that safe space, and that we all understand that there are differences and different supports and understanding of things. So I think a wellbeing strategy has to be all inclusive, really, look holistically across the piece and be very linked up with diversity and inclusion as well. Great,
and I think that's we've done a good go at that in a very short space of time. Someone's asked a great question here, which I think is true to what we've been speaking about. If you don't know, ask. So they've asked what kind of equipment are we talking about that's kind of used to help our colleagues? So what's the sort of stuff that you use, Gary, that helps you on the kind of day-to-day in your job?
So before I mentioned that, I was going to answer two questions in one. So it was about not having an official diagnosis. Now, I can only speak from our place. That wouldn't matter, because, you know, we want to support them. But also, I do believe something that we haven't talked about is access to work. Now, access to work, if people don't know, there are government departments, they're part of Department of Work and Pensions, and for people who've got any conditions they think comes under the scope of the Equality Act, they come out and do an assessment, not a health and safety assessment, an assessment of needs, and depending on the size of the organisation, they will pay up to 100% for any equipment. And so what they'll do is they'll come out and ask to speak to the employee and the employee's manager, and they see what they need. They're the experts. So it's, to answer the question, it's down to individuals. So I've got the biggest thing I've got is something called Dragon. Now, Dragon is voice activated software, and it is absolutely fantastic. I've had it since I got first diagnosed as being dyslexic. I've got other things like read and write, mind map, and these are all software that makes it easy for me to do reports. But there's a whole host of other things. I've had coaching before in neurodiversity. There's a whole thing. The important thing is having that conversation and then contacting access to work.
Sorry,
Sharon,
Sharon,
I
carry
was
on.
just gonna, so you've used the software there, but there's other things actually, you know, making sure that, you know, in terms of Gary, does he need to come into an office to work in a space that's noisy, can be distracting? And actually, no, we've agreed, you know, that there are times when Gary comes in, but a lot of what he can be done remotely. You know, today's a prime example. You know, and then making those plans that when he is in, then is there a quiet place in the office? You know, what does he leave earlier? Does he start? So there's a whole host of things that having a conversation you can put into place and action outside of just, you know, software. Gary mentioned about proofreading of reports and stuff, and we've agreed beforehand, haven't we, Gary, that, you know, we'll give things a once over. So there's lots of things that can be put into place.
So just one there, one Sharon's just mentioned, that is the most probably out of all the stuff in the reasonable adjustment passport, this Dragon software is the best, but the biggest thing is working from home. Now, we're all different. My girlfriend hates working from home, and I don't think it's because I work from home, but it's just she's got a lot more social skills than I have. Well, I hope it's not, because I'm actually doubting myself now. But you know, working from home without them interruptions, absolutely fantastic. However, it's really weird. Sometimes going in the office, it's dual things. Sometimes it causes me anxiety because we've got an open office. But, you know, Sharon says, you know, there's loads of places I can book a meeting room. But in other times, it's actually good seeing people as well. So it's a dual thing. You know, it causes me anxiety, but it also makes me feel better. And especially going in, because, you know, we work with a great team. This is not just the health and safety team. It's the wider HR and, you know, everyone within the organisation.
I think this might be the final question, because I've got a couple of things I need to say before we finish. But Alison's asked a really lovely question, which is about, she wants to set up one of her team members who's neurodivergent for success, and kind of talk to them about, you know, what their skills are, what they enjoy doing, what they feel they're best at, etc. But she's asking, does she also need to understand the things that they struggle with, so that they can mitigate those? So, like, is it best to have that balanced conversation to do strengths and weaknesses, and then utilize that rich source for working out the best approach?
Yeah, so I think that's right. If Alison can get that, one, feel confidence that they can open up to their employee, and also, you know, hopefully they've got a really good relationship. But, you know, don't start what I done. You know, I said, it was, even though it was supportive, that member of staff who I said, "Are you dyslexic?" Because straight away that put them on the back foot. You know, just asking them the open questions. How are you doing in work? Is there anything to do to support you? What are you good at? What do you need? Anything else? And hopefully, if you have them conversations, it can then that, you know, having them open conversations will help the person feel understood and valued, and maybe they can open up. Because the only person who knows what's best about neurodiversity in the workplace is the person who's got it.
And I just add to that, you're absolutely right asking about barriers and challenges, because I've had to say, so I've got quite a unique communication style, and I can come in and talk 100 to the dozen, and am I being really structured? Gary needs structure. And quite early on, you know, very openly, I said, how can I make sure that I communicate to you in the best way? I didn't get defensive about that, where Gary said, actually, sometimes, Sharon, I just need to understand what it is you're asking, and what's the outcome of that. So I can change my style then. So I know that when I come into something with Gary, I have to have more of a structured approach, which probably isn't my natural starting point. So really is important to ask, actually, what are the barriers and challenges? What do you find that I do that creates a problem, and vice versa? Actually, it's a two-way conversation. Yeah. Great.
Both of you, thank you so much. Like, a really, really big thank you. It's been like an absolutely fabulous element. The hours whiz by. For those of you on the call, please do complete the poll that's just popped up so we can get some feedback on the session. My key takeaway from this is, one, let's have more human conversations, and two, the value of that workplace adjustment passport, and really understanding how we can help within our organisation. So there is another session of these happening, the final one in our four-part series happens on Thursday, the 20th of July at 12:30. There should be a QR code popping up on the screen for you to scan so that you can register and come along to that one. Please do, would encourage you to do so. Lawrence will be back hosting it, so you'll get to see and hear from Lawrence again. He'll be joined by Fayola Francis, the ED&I lead for IOSH, and we're delighted to have Tony Bow, who is the Head of Health and Safety and Wellbeing for RSA Insurance, and Emma Case, who's the founder of Women Beyond the Box. The four of them will be discussing how better planning and foresight into creating healthy work environments raises opportunities and builds wider career development for everyone. So super session. I'm bang on the money. It's 1:30. That doesn't normally happen. I genuinely want to just express my gratitude and thanks to Sharon and to Gary. A wonderful session, really insightful, and yeah, congratulations to you both on such a great example for us all, and wish you all the best, and to everyone, have a lovely rest of your day, and I'm sure I'll see you all soon. Take care.